Exploring Canaan Numbers 13 to 14. Welcome to Bible Story Time. Today, we're going to dive into a powerful story about faith, fear, and God's promises. The Israelites, after being freed from Egypt and guided through the wilderness, are finally standing on the edge of the Promised Land. But their response to God's promise will shape their journey in ways they couldn't have imagined. Stay with us till the end to learn the lesson of faith and trusting God no matter the obstacles. The 12 spies sent into Canaan. God had promised the Israelites the land of Canaan, a land flowing with milk and honey, a land they would call their own. After years of wandering in the wilderness, it was time for them to take possession of the land. To prepare, Moses sent 12 spies, one from each tribe of Israel, to scout the land of Canaan. These spies were instructed to explore the land, assess its people, the cities, and the strength of the inhabitants. After 40 days of exploring, the spies returned with a mixed report. They confirmed that the land was everything God had promised. It was indeed flowing with milk and honey. The fruits were enormous, including a cluster of grapes so large that 2 men had to carry it on a pole. However, 10 of the spies gave a negative report. They spoke of the mighty cities, the fortified walls, and the giants who lived there, they claimed. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Their fear and doubt overshadowed the promise of God. But 2 of the spies, Caleb and Joshua, stood out. They reported that yes, the land was filled with giants, but they believed that with God's help they could overcome any obstacle. We can certainly do it, Caleb declared, expressing faith in God's power and his promise to give them the land. The people's reaction. Despite Caleb and Joshua's faith-filled report, the rest of the Israelites were consumed with fear. They grumbled against Moses and Aaron, saying, "If only we had died in Egypt or in this desert, why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder." The people were ready to abandon the journey and choose a new leader who would take them back to Egypt. Their fear clouded their judgment and caused them to forget God's faithfulness and the many miracles He had performed to bring them to this point. They refused to trust God's promise and instead let fear dictate their response. God's anger and judgment. When the people rejected Caleb and Joshua's encouragement and continued to rebel, God was angered. He told Moses that he was ready to destroy the entire nation and start over with Moses. But Moses interceded on their behalf, asking God to show mercy. God responded by saying, "As surely as I live, and as the glory of the Lord fills the whole earth, not one of those who saw my glory and the miraculous signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times will ever see the land I promised on oath to their ancestors." Because of their disobedience and lack of faith, God decreed that the entire generation of Israelites, except for Caleb and Joshua, would not enter the promised land. Instead, they would wander in the wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for each day the spies had spent scouting the land. The faith of Caleb and Joshua. God, however, promised Caleb and Joshua that they would enter the promised land because of their unwavering faith. Their trust in God's promises set them apart from the rest of the people. Caleb and Joshua were the only 2 from the entire generation who would experience the fulfillment of God's promise, the lesson of faith and obedience. The Israelites' refusal to trust God's promise and their fear of the giants in the land teach us valuable lessons. Faith over fear. Caleb and Joshua demonstrated the importance of faith over fear. They recognized the obstacles but trusted that God was bigger and more powerful than any challenge they faced. Trust in God's promises. Even when circumstances seem impossible, God's promises remain true. The Israelites forgot that God had already shown them His power. He had parted the Red Sea, provided manna, and brought them this far. His promises were certain. Obedience to God's will. Disobedience to God's will leads to consequences. The Israelites' lack of trust in God led them to miss out on the blessings He had prepared for them. Their disobedience resulted in 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. God honors faithfulness. Caleb and Joshua's unwavering faith was rewarded. Despite the majority's doubt, they remained faithful to God, and God honored that faith by granting them the privilege of entering the Promised Land. Lessons for us today. Face challenges with faith. Like Caleb and Joshua, we are called to face life's challenges with faith. There will always be giants in the land, but God has already promised us victory if we trust in Him. Remember God's faithfulness. Just as the Israelites forgot God's previous miracles, we sometimes forget what He has already done for us. When we face difficulties, we must remember God's past faithfulness and trust that He will continue to provide for us. Obedience brings blessings. Our obedience to God's will is essential for receiving His blessings. When we choose faith and obedience over fear and doubt, we align ourselves with God's purpose for our lives. The story of exploring Canaan challenges us to trust in God's promises and face our fears with faith. Just as Caleb and Joshua chose faith over fear, we too must choose to trust in God's plan, no matter the obstacles. If this story encouraged you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Bible Storytime. Don't miss our next video where we will dive into the next great story of God's faithfulness. Remember, God's promises are always true. Have faith in Him.